The Hawks' Serious Corruption Unit in the Free State had to be sure that there is enough evidence before issuing a warrant of arrest for ANC Secretary-General and former Free State Premier Ace Magashule. This is according to the Free State Hawks spokesperson, Steyn, who confirmed yesterday that a warrant has been signed and will be served on Magashule. Now, Magashule is expected to appear in the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court on Friday with some of the other accused on charges relating to the 2014 Free State 255 million rand asbestos contract. We're joined now by Pieter-Louis Myburgh, a Daily Maverick investigative journalist and author of the book that uncovered all of this, Gangster State, Unravelling Ace Magashule's Web of Capture. Great to have you, Peter. Thanks very, very much for being with us here on the program.
Good morning, Leanne. Thanks for having me.
Did it come as a surprise yesterday? I mean, we all turned to your tweet on Daily Maverick and had a look, seeing that the warrant was going to be issued. It almost came as a surprise to the SG himself. I mean, what talk to us about yesterday and what unfolded?
Yeah, so look, it always actually does come as a bit of a shock when finally we reach such a drastic juncture. So I've obviously kind of been following the law enforcement agencies' work on this matter for quite a while, a good couple of months already. Even considering my close proximity to their work and sort of checking in onto the progress, it still came as a bit of a shock to learn that they were actually pulling the trigger. And it's also a very good moment, I think. I think that South Africa has for very long now kind of collectively held its breath to see if this newly constituted NPA would actually go after the very top alleged perpetrators of corruption. And in this instance, it appears that they have.
And this certainly is. I mean, we obviously saw Vincent Smith, but this one, Ace Magashule, I mean, this is something that a lot of people have been asking. When are we going to see anything happen? When are we going to see the big guns finally getting held to task over this? So let's go back a little bit. I mean, we've interviewed you before regarding this, but what initially piqued your interest in Ace Magashule?
Look, I think it's a very powerful political figure. It's somebody who obviously in his guise as Premier in the Free State had for a good decade presided over massive amounts of government spending. So that immediately makes somebody a very viable candidate for close scrutiny. I think investigative reporting is always attracted to powerful people, especially those whose dealings are undoubtedly in the public interest. They're working with taxpayers' money. They roll out projects on behalf of the public, and especially in a South African context, in a developmental state, projects that are supposed to uplift and, develop a country that is so massively skewed along developmental lines. So that, considering that he was Premier, residing over all these projects, there were also always these very strong indications that his handling of government affairs in the province was not above board. Certainly I wasn't the first journalist to essentially come on the scene and probe Mr. Magashule's dealings as Premier, but I made the decision, it was around, I think, late 2017, early 2018, that there was just too much really to unpack in a sequence of reports for a news publication, and that it was a theme that really had to be clustered together in a book format because it was such a vast story. It goes back to his time as an MEC when, then Premier Masiya Lakota already indicated, that Mr. Magashule was getting involved in allegedly corrupt dealings, and it wasn't just political, contestation. There were, back in those days already, Scorpions investigations, police investigations. It's always been kind of subdued. And obviously that's narrative. It goes all the way through to his years as Premier. And time after time, there were these indications of really serious allegations of corruptions involving his handling of the province's affairs.
Yeah, and of course this whole asbestos saga is now at the heart of all of it. And I mean, the amount of money, we're talking to 255 million. And what's frightening is that that amount of money was paid by taxpayers from the Free State Housing Department, and only, according to, as you've got these numbers in front of you, but you'll be able to tell us a bit more, only 3% of that total amount of money was actually spent on the project. A shocking 7 million from 255 million. The rest of it has disappeared. I mean, we speak of Blackhead Consulting, you speak of Diamond Hill, we speak of Master Trade. I mean, there's just such a web. So we know about that. Let us talk to the SG's involvement in all of this. What is assumed that he benefited out of this? I know there was the talk of 10 million that was mentioned at the Zondo Commission, but what do you think he actually got out of this particular deal?
Yeah. Okay, and so the most explosive and compelling sort of bits of information involving Mr. Magashule's involvement, or regarding his involvement, they rest on documents that I've retrieved from the business enterprises that Mr. Igor Mpambani had set up. So he's one component of this joint venture that benefited from the deal. He's the Diamond Hill component. Of course, Mr. Mpambani is no longer with us. He was gunned down in Sandton in June 2017. But these emails that came from his businesses, from Diamond Hill and other entities, they firstly show that at the time this deal was put together in late 2014, Mpambani and Edwin Sodi from Blackhead Consulting, who's now one of the accused in the case, they put together a spreadsheet, a cost of business spreadsheet, it was called, that showed exactly how the proceeds of this contract would be divvied up or divided by a variety of third parties who were involved in the contract, somehow involved in the contract. And there were initials placed on the spreadsheet. For instance, the initial of AM appeared on the spreadsheet, and that contained figures. For instance, AM showed, or the spreadsheet showed AM needed to get 10 million rand from the contract. So that already aroused my suspicions, but of course it doesn't by any means stand on its own. That kind of led me to other documentation in this EGO files trove of documents and emails that then proved that AM may indeed have been Mr. Ace Magashule, because on key moments that the Free State Department of Human Settlements pays money through to this joint venture, you have to recall that there's about 8 tranches that went through to the joint venture to make up this figure of more than 200 million rand. So each time the money goes through, and on several occasions, somebody like Morwadi Charlotta, who was Ace Magashule's PA, she would, and sometimes literally within hours after the joint venture was paid by Magashule, was paid by the provincial administration, his PA would come and write an email to Mpambani and ask Mpambani for money. And in no uncertain terms, she would say that this is on behalf of the Premier. We've got an email that says that Premier asked for 470,000 rand to be paid to so-and-so account or in so-and-so direction. And on another occasion, there's a request for funding for the Friends university fees, or Friends child's university fees in the United States of America. The request is sent to Magashule, but his PA then forwards it to Mpambani, and he uses this money, taxpayers' money from the government coffers, to pay the university fees of one of Mr. Magashule's contacts, a friend. And there are multiple other ones.
I mean, and this is not to mention the Bentleys, the Ferraris, the fancy houses, the cars, the lifestyles, all of this that is spoken about. And we see this written out in your book, and yet people in the Free State are still living in the circumstances that were meant to be eradicated in these asbestos houses all these years later. People have actually been reportedly killed in the Free State over these issues. I mean, the person in the Auditor General's office who was interrogating corruption, for instance, and a businessman was gunned down in Sandton with links, allegedly, to this contract, 255 million rand. What do you think has unleashed the hawks now in a 6-year-old case?
I think the environment has just finally been, or the platform has been provided to our national prosecuting authority and the law enforcement bodies to work freely. So, South Africans definitely, nobody should expect the national prosecuting authority, or we would never want a situation where they target certain people, as is now being obviously alleged by, the likes of Magashule and some of his political allies. But I simply think this is a case of finally, after decades of suppression and capture of the NPA and top-level law enforcement bodies, those entities are now free to pursue issues of corruption regardless of how senior somebody is. So I can almost guarantee that this asbestos matter would not be the only case that has a criminal case lodged at a police station in the Free State bearing the name of Mr. Ace Magashule. But for a good many years, those cases in the Free State simply disappeared, and that they were never pursued to this extent. So I really think the climate has just been sufficiently altered for the NPA to be allowed to do its job. Really, it's just a manifestation of the NPA doing its job in a fearless and an unbiased manner.
Peter, how strong is the case? I mean, how watertight do you think the Hawks' case against them? Because speaking yesterday, the SG sounded very confident. And to quote his words, he says, with regard to the warrant, says, if it happens, it'll happen. I'm not worried at all.
Yeah, no, he certainly looks very confident. So I can only speak to what I've seen. So I just want to clarify. I haven't seen the charge sheet yet. So I'm speaking based on the documents I've sort of pored over for hours and hours and analyzed and reconstructed as an investigative journalist. And that certainly shows that Mr. Magashule was directly involved in the cutting up, essentially, or divvying up of the proceeds of what could be a corrupt contract. So I've spoken to a couple of legal minds, and it's pretty clear from their understanding of something like the Prevention of Corrupt Activities Act, PRECA and POCA and all those pieces of legislation that you don't necessarily have to pocket a Ferrari or a new property if you are party to directing the flows of the proceeds of a corrupt contract. If it's one of your friend's daughter's study fees or a jaunt overseas for your political allies, and this actually occurred. Some of his ANC Youth League friends were sent with their asbestos money to Cuba to go and have a nice couple of weeks under the Caribbean sun. That kind of involvement already triggers criminal complicity because you are party to directing what is essentially alleged proceeds of corruption, and that's already problematic.
But Peter, the big question is there a smoking gun? Because, we're hearing that, just some of the comments that are coming from, for instance, the MKMVA saying Gangster State is propaganda and poor journalism. They're saying that, this is just a witch hunt. It's not true. Obviously, these are the things that are being said on the sidelines, but is there a smoking gun? That is the major big question.
Yeah, it doesn't really surprise me that the MKMVA would downplay, what is written in the book. That sort of forms part of their ploy to brand any sort of critical reporting on Mr. Magashule and the allies as weak or, whatever the case might be. But I think the smoking guns come in the form of those documents I just mentioned.
Okay.
So the NPA would certainly be able to, if they independently verify the veracity, or the legitimate nature of these documents, they could present them in a court of law and say, we've got it in writing on a document here that the Premier had received these requests for funding and then he made his PA, request the money from Pambani and it was paid. So there's definitely a couple of elements and pieces of documentation that constitute smoking guns.
Yeah. Very quickly, Peter, I remember at the time when your book came out last year, there was a threat from the SG to sue you. Whatever happened? Whatever came of that? Were you ever handed the letters? Is there anything pending from that?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. So, it's very prominently indicated that he would do so, and we are still waiting. That has not happened to date, no.
All right. So hopefully, as he's said, he wants his time to tell the story. He is innocent, and I suppose it's up to a court to decide this. He's appearing on Friday. Do you think anything is going to come on this? Because a lot of people are just suspicious, saying, this is, again, just something that is going to go nowhere. And he will probably remain SG. He will not step down. What does your gut tell you?
Yeah. So firstly, I think on the prosecution side of things, once again, I haven't seen the charge sheet, but I would venture to say that the team that put together this prosecution have worked extremely hard and diligently on the matter. Understand it's a kind of a multi-pronged approach. There's financial analysis. It's a pretty solid team that put together this prosecution. So I don't think it's a light prosecution, a light effort that's simply going to be quashed by his legal representatives. And obviously, the second consideration would be the political manifestations. That is something that's going to play out in the realm of the ruling party.
Okay.
A ruling party that has prominently decided at a Nazareth conference has resolved to deal with corruption by forcing their top members to at least temporarily step aside when they're embroiled in top-level corruption cases. So that'll be very interesting to follow, to see if the ANC can stick to its own resolution and enforce the call for Mr. Magashule to step down.
Yep, indeed. And it's a part of, as you say, the ANC Constitution. So we'll see what comes of it. Pieter-Louis Myburgh, I've got to unfortunately leave it there, investigative journalist and author, talking to us about this Ace Magashule's court appearance, which is on Friday in Bloemfontein after a warrant was issued for him. Let's take a quick break. We've got to say goodbye to our SABC2 viewers after this.